Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles alike, to another enchanting episode of Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room, bringing your favorite Harry Potter fanfiction to audio format. So sit back, relax, and occupy headphones and let the magic begin.
This chapter has a trigger warning. It says there are implications of rape. The aftermath of dealing with that, please take care of your mental health. So keep that in mind going into this chapter. If that is not your thing, then I would suggest you go on to the next chapter. Apostasy by Deydralinne. Chapter 29, Confessions. Hermione slipped off the bed at the light knocking at the door. Ginny wasn't quite asleep, but she wasn't far from it, and even though she knew Ginny was awake, she crept lightly, not wanting to stir her from the state she was in. She opened the door a crack and saw Blaise on the other side. He looked like hell. "My, please," he whispered. Hermione's heart lurched for the man. She couldn't begin to understand what he was going through right now. If it had been her being kept away, she might have already blasted her way in. She glanced over at the redhead, only to find her looking at her with sullen eyes. She gave a small nod, and Hermione opened the door. Blaise sighed in relief and slipped into the room. "Guys, let's give them some space," Hermione said. Daphne and Astoria slipped from the room without a word, but Pansy paused and squeezed Blaise's arm before following Hermione out. "Care for a drink?" Pansy mumbled. Exhaustion was clearly catching up to her housemate, but Hermione nodded all the same, following her down to the bar in the sitting room. The house was so quiet it was eerie. Astoria and Daphne slipped up the stairs, and a few minutes later closed a door. Theo and Draco were nowhere to be seen, which left just Hermione and Pansy. Hermione had become somewhat the unofficial drinks maker of the house since their arrival, but today Pansy made her way over, pouring herself 3 fingers of rum and drinking it down quickly. She proceeded to pour another glass for herself and one for Hermione, swallowing that one down as well before she finally began to speak. Tipping a 3rd glass worth of rum, she avoided Hermione's eyes as if ashamed. "Did you know I have an older brother, Phineas? He was the pride and joy of my father's life." Pansy smiled sadly. "He died. My final year of school, he got caught in a storm on his broom, fell, and smashed open his skull." Hermione said nothing when Pansy drained that glass too. The glistening of unshed tears had begun to shine in the witch's eyes, leaning against the counter of the bar. Pansy inhaled deeply, staring at one spot behind the bar top, and seemed to deflate in on herself. "Nothing I ever did for my father was good enough. Not to say that he wasn't vocally disappointed in me, just that I did not matter. I listened and I did everything I was told, Hermione. I saved myself for the husband he would have picked out for me one day. I would have married them and been a dutiful and doting wife, even though I knew I was gay." Hermione slid her untouched drink closer to the witch, who took it gratefully. "I would have produced heirs for him and played the part of the perfect pure-blood wife because that's what was expected of me. I got good grades. I never answered back. I did everything that was expected of me. When Phineas died, my dad began drinking really bad. He started gambling and nearly lost our entire estate." Hermione felt sick. She could sense where this was going and tried to prepare herself mentally for it. But was there ever any real preparation for conversations like this? Hermione had been lucky, she knew that. She knew that the statistics were horrifyingly high, and she had been, at least so far, one of the fortunate ones. So he is in big, like, owed the guy Frankie a lot of money, like more than even our estate was worth. We were about to lose everything. And my mom, well, she was so far checked out of her head on pills that she had no idea what was going on. So my dad cut this guy a deal. He could take the holiday homes, half of what was in the vaults, and me. My virginity. Pansy stares at the bottle, maybe contemplating if she should chance another, but she had already had a significant amount in a short time, so maybe not. "I go home for Easter, right? Like right before the final battle, not knowing what he had done. It's weird because no one picks me up from the station, but I make my way home and I walk in the house And this guy, Frankie, jumps out from behind the door and shoves me down on the marble. Hits me a few times, so I'm disoriented. I don't even know what the hell is going on, but I roll over and I try to defend myself, and I see my dad. Evidently, Pansy decides that she can, in fact, handle at least one more drink, and tears begin falling down her cheeks. This Frankie guy binds my hands, and he sticks them to the ground above my head and starts shoving up my skirt and unbuckles his pants. I'm screaming and trying to kick him away. He's fat, old, hairy, and smells like pigs, you know? And I'm pleading with my dad, Daddy, please, please help me. What are you doing? Why are you letting him do this? Right? And do you know what he said to me? Hermione remains silent, but doesn't dare look away from the witch in front of her. Pansy scoffs and slams down the now empty glass on the bar top. He looks me in the eyes and he says to me, just do as you're told for once. Shut up and give him what he's here for. Our family needs this. Then he stood there and he watched me while I was raped, while I cried, while that scumbag came in me, and they got up and left with a fucking grin. My dad looked at me and the mess it had created all over the foyer floor, and he told me to clean it up. He went upstairs to his room, and I left for Daphne's. Hermione was certain that she had begun crying again, but she felt frozen and unsure of what to do or say. Pansy didn't let the silence linger for long. She sniffed and straightened, looking at Hermione with tired, worn-out eyes. Draco came by a few days later, distraught because you three had been brought in and he had to watch you get tortured and all that. And when he found out what had happened, he just got up and left. I didn't think much of it. I was too deep in my own shit. But he came back the next day and told me that my dad was dead. In my foyer. In a mess I hadn't cleaned up, and that Frankie was next to him, with a fire poker shoved up his ass. Pansy scoffed and shook her head. My dad was the first person Draco ever killed. It was something he had really struggled with up until then. He had said he felt like he still could have been swayed either way up until that point. But after what happened to me, something in him snapped, and suddenly, killing wasn't so scary. He did that for me, so I would never have to live looking over my shoulder for the shadows of the big, bad man, Hermione. He is a good person, and what happened to you, to Ginny, it really scared him, in a way I haven't seen in a long time. I know you have this game of push and pull going on, but it ain't a game to him. Just thought you should know that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to bed. Pansy sauntered off with far too much poise for a woman who had just consumed so much rum. Then Hermione was alone with her thoughts, and that was a scary place to be right now. She wanted Harry dead, Ron, Kingsley, every fucking person who was in that house, every fucking person in the order. Every last one of them could burn in hell for all she cared. How had she and Ginny stood by for so long while the order had eroded themselves from the inside out with their lies about morality, while they had condemned her and Ginny when they offered up their souls in the name of their cause? The order's crimes had been just as heinous, just as grotesque, but buried under a different mask: hypocrisy. Hermione walked around the bar and poured herself a glass of gin and tonic. If she had died and Seamus had lived, would they have treated him the same way that they had treated her? Honestly, she didn't think so. If anything, they might consider him a hero for having ended someone as vile and evil as her, or what they claim her to be. Funny how she was the bad guy, but this entire war could have been over already, countless lives saved, if the person they followed so blindly and without question had just been a little less greedy. It didn't matter. She was going to end this war one way or another, and she would make sure of it. In the coming days, she would need to sit down and make a plan. They still had to find Louis. Tragedy in their own lives or not, Renaud was counting on them for that. Too much time had already passed, and Hermione could only hope that Blaise had sent off a message to one of their teams to start the search prior to the events in Diagon Alley. If not, then they need to double down and find him quickly. The faster they could conduct political business, the faster this war would be over, and the less likely things like Ginny being raped or herself nearly dying in the street would happen. And then there were the words Pansy had left her with. She didn't know how to stop. It was who she was. She pushed everything to the limits, including this thing with Draco. It ain't a game to him, replayed in her mind like a broken record. Well, if it wasn't a game, then what was it? Because he had yet to make a move. He had been waiting for her to fold just as much as she had. Theo slinked past the doorframe and up the stairs. The list of things she had to somehow accomplish kept growing, and she felt like she should be cracking under the weight of it all. In a sense, for some things she felt like she was, but for others, like her goal to find a way to save Astoria's life, she felt strong, airy. Theo never spoke much about his fears with Astoria. Hermione wasn't sure if that came down to denial or that she simply hadn't earned that trust yet. He hadn't seen her since she had pulled that little disappearing act from his basement. Realistically, she had told him she would stay put and then roped his dying wife into distracting him, so she wouldn't be surprised if she never earned that trust. And instead of helping him, she had gone and added more work to his pile in the way of Harry Potter. Someone she was sure no one actually wanted to be helping right now, in any way, shape, or form. Hermione bent down and slipped off her slippers, discarding them out of sight, lest Blaise saw them. Taking her drink and trekking slowly across the sitting room and through the kitchen to the yard outside, letting her hair fall from her ponytail it had been pulled back into. There were very few times that Hermione got to feel the ground beneath her feet. Hermione's mom had told her that if she ever felt herself spinning out of control one day, then all she had to do was stand barefoot on the grass. At the time, being a small child who had idealized her mother, she had believed her. As an adult who had been fighting in a war the majority of her life, she saw that advice for what it was, a crock of shit. It, of course, didn't stop her from doing it anyway, crossing the gravel pathway to the center of the lawn and squishing the green blades between her toes. She watched them squirm and sipped her drink. It had been a long time since she had thought of her mother. She tried not to, if she was honest. Tried to block them away from her mind in a way that she had blocked herself from theirs. It was less painful that way in the beginning. But in the moment she did allow herself to think of them, she wondered what they were doing. She didn't think of them as anything other than alive, though she supposed they could have died. She could have died. At least in the afterlife, if there was one. She would have gotten a chance to explain. She wasn't sorry. She could never be sorry for what she had done, just like she was not sorry for her choice to kill. Would there come a time when those deaths would come back to haunt her? Maybe. But for now, at least she had no regrets. Not unless you counted the people she regretted having let live, that is. The glass is cool against her lips, the light bubbles dancing around her mouth and giving her just enough warmth and clarity to think. It had been close the other day. She was fine, and that was great, but it had been close. She needed to find a way to build on their rings to make them even better. It wasn't good enough. She couldn't handle the regrets of another close call. Hermione swallowed down the last of her glass and began the trek back inside. She was tired. She needed sleep, but she needed to make sure first, above all else, that Ginny was okay before Hermione left her to do that. The Order wanted a fucking war, and they would get one. She was not afraid of any army, of any sheep in lion's clothing. She was a fucking dragon, and she was tired of being hunted. Not when she was an apex predator, something they would likely only realize as she burnt them all down.